Welcome to the Founding Fuel Conversations podcast. This is a conversation we've been waiting to host for some time, not because it responds to a trend, but because it speaks to a set of questions many of us encounter quietly, often between roles, chapters, or moments of transition. Over the past year, we've heard from readers and listeners who are less interested in the next big move, but more interested in how to think about meaning, renewable, renewal, and usefulness of life as life evolves, especially when familiar markers of progress no longer feel quite right. And that's the context for today's dialogue. We're joined by Chip Conley, whose work has helped many people put words to a stage of life that is widely felt but rarely discussed. Through the idea of modern elderhood, Chip invites us to see aging not as a problem to be solved, but as a phase that carries its own responsibilities and possibilities. We're also joined by Neeraj Sagar, who brings a grounded Indian perspective to these questions. Neeraj's reflections come from working closely with leaders navigating change, professionally and personally, and from paying attention to how transitions actually unfold in real lives. Anchoring this conversation is Vijay Bhat, familiar figure for our Founding Fuel community, who has a very thoughtful, unhurried way of guiding dialogue, one that allows ideas to emerge without being forced and complexities to stay intact. This is not a conversation about aging as decline or reinvention as spectacle. It's about how we stay engaged, reflective, and generous as we move into a different phase of life. Vijay, over to you.
Thank you, IG, for that very thoughtful introduction. Having done a few of these sessions with the Founding Fuel audience, I know that it's a very accomplished group. It's a very thoughtful group. And my sense is that it's a group that is okay to age, but not to stagnate. And I want to tease apart some of those dimensions in today's conversation. I think life, society, our education system prepares us for the first arc. It's the arc of growing physically, emotionally, psychologically, economically. It's the arc of acquiring. It's the arc of addition. But I don't think life prepares us for the second arc. I don't think society prepares us for the second arc. That second arc is a little more uncertain. As you said, it's filled with responsibilities and possibilities. And it's tricky to navigate. And so today, the topic of our podcast is embracing life's second arc towards meaning, renewal, and elderhood. Let me introduce the phrase life's second arc before we proceed. What does it mean? I came across this definition, which I liked very much. And it says, life's second arc is the phase of life where we stop building the self and start offering who we have become. I like that. I like the way that transition has been articulated, where we stop building the self and start offering who we have become. And we will explore that. I would like to position or offer this conversation more as an invitation for reorientation of ourselves. As IG said, it's less about reinvention, it's less about life hacks, it's less about what to do, but to really start to think about a new way of looking at ourselves and who we are becoming. One of the things that we did was to run a small pulse survey among our founding fuel community and among our network. And I was very pleasantly surprised that so many people actually responded to the survey. We probably wrote to about 100 people, and more than 60 people responded. And that tells me that this topic itself touches a chord, it touches a nerve. So I want to thank those 60 people who've responded. I'm sure many of you will watch this podcast. Let me just highlight some of the things that came up in that survey. The phrase that somebody used, I feel externally successful, but internally unfinished. I like that phrase a lot because I think it captured the essence of what many people feel. Some of you said that preparedness for the second arc is uneven, bumpy. It's not financial, it's more emotional, perhaps even spiritual. Another frame that was quite consistent was that letting go is hard because we've been prepared and we've been trained to acquire and to possess and to hold. And so letting go is hard. When we talked about meaning, the language changed, the emotion changed, it softened, it moistened. People spoke about presence, contribution, service, not achievement. And the most striking thing was that there was no anxiety about aging, but the respondents struggled to put a name or put a frame to who they are becoming. And I think it's in this context that the conversation we are going to have today is going to be so important and so meaningful. Chip and Neeraj have already been introduced, so I won't spend much time in reintroducing them. And I want to start by talking about when does the first arc end and how do we recognize that the shift is beginning. And so let me bring in Chip. Chip, the question for you is, many of the leaders that I coach, I work with, they don't experience failure. They don't experience burnout. They don't even experience slowing down. There is no memo. So the question is, how do leaders recognize this invisible threshold when it arrives or when they arrive at it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love how you framed this, Vijay. I would say that for some, there's both the external and then the internal. For some, what midlife, as we know it, which is really, I think, evolved quite a bit. Let's start by saying, in an era in which the average person only lived till 40 or 50, midlife was not really a life stage, because on average, people didn't live to midlife. But today, with people living into their 60s, 70s, 80s, depending upon the country or the culture, midlife is a life stage, and it is a road. There is not a roadmap for people. So sometimes for some people, it is the life circumstances that happen often in one's mid to late 40s, sometimes in their 50s. And it could be a divorce. It could be selling a company. It could be losing a job. It could be losing your parents. It could be the sandwich generation, taking care of elderly parents while taking care of children. The data on the U curve of happiness is pretty clear that shows that this era from 45 to 50 or 52 is really the low point of life satisfaction for adults. So some of what's happening there is circumstantial. For women, there's perimenopause. For men, it is something called andropause. Um, but sometimes it's not circumstantial. When it's circumstantial, it's more obvious.
Yeah.
And then you have to take note.
Yeah.
But for most people, it's not like some circumstance happens that says, okay, I have to change my life because I'm now divorced. Instead, it's that quiet, it's highly successful people quietly falling apart. It's that feeling inside. I loved what you said, what one of the people said, which was externally successful, but internally unfinished. It's the questions that start to arise in someone. And whether the question is that all there is? Which is what a maybe a successful person would say, or is my life a disappointment, which is what someone might say around 45 to 50 if they don't feel like they've been successful, based upon some definition of success that was a success script that they were handed by their parents, typically. So I think this is an era when time starts to become both an ally and a foe, an enemy, in the sense that you start to realize that there's only so much time left. If you have not been successful by 35, oh, you still have a lot of time ahead of you. If by 50 you feel like you have not been successful in the way you expected to be successful, there is less of a sense that you have enough time to do that. So time is the enemy in that sense, but it's also the friend, because this is also the time in one's life when someone realizes time is my most valuable asset. How am I using this time? How am I going to curate the second half of my adulthood? There's lots more I could say, but I will leave it at that to start with.
Thank you. That's really interesting. What you mentioned about the happiness curve. I thought that's new information for me. Thank you for bringing that to the fore. Neeraj, if you could build on that, the the obvious markers and the less obvious markers that Chip has talked about. From your perspective, are these universal markers? Are they culturally distinct? Would you say that in the Indian culture, given the Indian philosophical tradition, etc., there are different markers? What's your take on this?
First of all, again, thank you, Vijay and IG for inviting me. And it's lovely to be here with Chip, who I actually have always looked up to as a pioneer in what he's doing. So in fact, before I started WisdomCircle, I think attending a course that Chip ran actually got me more motivated to do this. So I'm only, I think, as you will see, I will agree with a lot of what Chip says, but maybe, as you correctly said, add on the execution layer of what we are actually seeing that builds on what Chip has framed. So we have about 120,000 people who have signed up on our platform since we started, who are retired but want to work. Right. So and through that we've also spoken to many, just to even frame what we do. Now, to answer your specific, so that's the context of me giving the response that I'm just going to give. The base level markers that we see on execution, on when the rubber hits the road, is number one, when the discussion of retirement starts happening at home, saying, "Oh, you only have X many years left." So that's, and that base level retirement terminology, which I'm not a big fan of, is what really starts people to start thinking about this problem. And it's, by the way, strengthened, if you will, by just the age norms we have, whether in the US it's a 401k, in India it's the Provident Fund, in Singapore it's the CPF, etc. So culturally, there's a lot of ingrained "you are done" kind of terminology that is being used, which is the base level marker that everybody starts worrying about. And then starts playing too, saying, okay, now what? And then there are cultural markers, as you asked, right? And the cultural markers differ quite a bit from country to country. So we at WisdomCircle, although we are much more India focused, we've also and we are a Delaware company, but we have presence now in Africa, in rest of Asia, in Europe, and the Middle East. So the difference that we see is in every culture there are these culturally led markers, right? So how you get treated at a wedding, as an example, or when you start getting invited to specific events which younger people don't get invited to, and you are given a seat where the others have to stand. So there are these very nuanced sort of ways where the world starts telling you you're getting older and you have to move. So I think, again, base level markers are similar across the world. The cultural markers, I mean, like in the Middle East, as an example, you have grandkids much sooner, right? Unlike, say, in the US or others. So the moment you have grandchildren, you suddenly have attained a different, the society is already giving you a marker saying, okay, you're going to be treated differently. In India, at the weddings, you will see, okay, go touch so-and-so's feet and get their blessings, right? That's a marker. So you have these very interesting markers that are socially guiding you towards saying you are now moving to this other phase. So that's what I would add.
Lovely. I think that's so interesting. Something that happened to me just today. There is some roadworks going on outside my house, and when I was walking outside, there was a young person walking her dog, and she said, "Uncle, please be careful." And there was a marker. I said, "Thank you very much. I'm glad you didn't call me Nana." Nana means grandfather in
Yes.
in English. So thank you for that, Neeraj. Chip, a quick follow-up question for you. You mentioned success. Is success a disguise or a proxy?
Success is a drug. And when I say that, what I mean is that it is a drug in the sense that it is something that we get intoxicated by in certain cultures, the US being one of the most rampant. And this is part of the reason why we really need to look at what definition of success really fits us. When we're young, with our parents and with our communities, with our friends, we have a definition of success that is almost created for us.
Yeah.
And our job is to live up to that or rebel against it. And let's be clear, not everybody decides to read from that success script. But even if you're rebelling against it, you are, in essence, influenced by it. And so there's a word that I've been coining called successism. In the US, there's a word called consumerism, and that word is over 70 years old. Consumerism basically means that there is an overlay in the society of what defines proper and successful consumer behavior, and you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, as we say in the United States. Successism is different than that in that it is not about acquisition of products. It is in status based upon your definition of success. And when you're in a culture that has a successism paradigm, you are in some ways, under the thumb, under the influence, to use the drug term again, under the influence of a cultural paradigm that for many people is oppressive, not impressive, but oppressive. And which is, I think, for many people around midlife, you start to realize that maybe your definition of success is different than your parents. And for some people, they figure that out much earlier, especially if they're rebelling. But if they're rebelling, then they're frankly still like they're in the pinball machine, like a pinball going around because they're like rebelling against something. It is when you move to an age in your life, whether that's in your 40s or 50s or whenever it is, when you have enough wisdom and enough understanding of your narrative and why you are here on earth to write your own success script that many people learn how to become happier. And I do think this is part of the reason why after that low point around 45 to 50, people's level of life satisfaction starts to grow because they feel the sense of freedom and agency that comes with, writing their own script.
Hmm. So I love the way you coin these new phrases, Chip. Successism is a good one.
Yeah.
You've also been using the phrase modern elder quite a lot. And tell us a little bit about the genesis of that phrase, but also tell us what defines a modern elder in practice. And the reason why I'm asking this question is because, again, in some cultures, elder may have a positive connotation,
Yeah.
and in other cultures, it may not have such a positive connotation.
Yeah.
Uh, so tell us about the phrase. How did it originate, and what does a modern elder look like in real life, in practice?
Well, I will tell you, since the US is a pretty ageist society, that it is a term that is fraught with a certain amount of baggage. Because when you hear the word elder, you think elderly, but they're two different things. When you're elderly, you are often in the last 10 years of your life, and you're at a stage in life where you really do need support from others. Um, Again, I'm speaking from the American context here. But to be an elder is a relative term. So if you're an elder, it just means that you are older than the people around you, or you are held in a regard in which you have more experience than the people around you. So there are people who are software engineers at 35 who could be an elder in a startup. There are, professional athletes like Tom Brady, the NFL quarterback in the US who was, playing into his 40s in a sport that was mostly people in their 20s. So he was an elder. So the reason the term came about was because I joined after 24 years of running the second largest and starting the second largest boutique hotel company in the United States. After selling it, I was asked by the founders of Airbnb 13 years ago to join them when it was a tiny Airbnb was a tiny little startup, and nobody in the company had any background in hospitality or travel or frankly in entrepreneurship. And so I joined them, and the founders, after about a month, said, "Chip, you are our modern elder." And I hated that. I was like, well, to hell with you. I mean, are you making fun of my age? But I was 52, and the average age in the company was 26. The founders were between ages 29 and 31. And so, yes, I was an elder, but I didn't understand what they meant. And they said, "You're our modern elder. We hired you for your knowledge, but what you really brought was your wisdom." But then they said the thing that really got to me, which I loved. And they said, "Chip, a modern elder is someone who's as curious as they are wise." This alchemy of curiosity and wisdom. And that to me is what defines a modern elder today. A modern elder is a mentor and an intern. So I coined a term called mentern. A
Hmm.
mentern is someone who is both a mentor and an intern. And at Airbnb, in my 7.5 years there, I'm very proud of my time there and helping the company become the most valuable hospitality company in the world. During my time there, I was in many ways an intern because I had never worked in a tech company before. So at 52, I was joining a company, and people were speaking a language that I didn't understand. And from that, I came to the conclusion that, like, wow, I am supposed to actually be a learner as much as I am a teacher. And what that did is it created a beautiful intergenerational collaboration between me and the younger people. So people saw me as a teacher, but I had to really be open to being the learner as well. And
Mm.
I think that's a little bit the difference between that and maybe a traditional elder who, in traditional culture, the traditional elder, the wisdom is being dispensed. The physics of wisdom moves from
Yeah,
old to young. And
yeah,
today, wisdom can move in both directions, or at least knowledge can.
yeah, yeah. Lovely, lovely. I really like the curiosity and wisdom combination that you talked about, the teacher learner phase. Um,
Mhm.
Neeraj, from an Indian perspective, we have the Vanaprastha stage. And in many traditional cultures, in the Native American culture, for example, we have the Council of Grandmothers. Uh, so, can you give us some insight into how this elderhood can be interpreted in a more contemporary way in societies which already have a notion of elderhood, a traditional notion of elderhood?
Thank you, Vijay. And I think, and Chip, you may already know this, but so the Hindu philosophy actually has four stages or four life stages that you probably know of, right?
Yeah.
So Vanaprastha, the forest dweller, is interesting, right? I think first when this was coined, I don't think we lived that long. So you can imagine, even if our lifespan was 40 or 50 years, we still had four life stages. So which
Mhm.
tells you how early we had to move out of the householder responsibility to move into this forest dweller, and then later the renunciation, if you will. Imagine you would have renunciated by the time you were 40. So modern elder was I think so. Um, so to your question, Vijay, I've struggled with this, right? I think as because this notion of, so first of all, it was initially supposed to be one after the other. So
Yeah.
Vanaprastha was supposed to be the third stage. And that means you were done with your student stage, you were done with your householder responsibility stage, and now there was something deeper. Things are changing, right? So I think a lot of overlaps have started happening. So you can be in Vanaprastha and as well as being a student at the same time. Again, just like Chip said, right? So we're still
Yeah.
learning as we're growing. We're still curious. Um, for me, I keep getting Vanaprastha is the start of giving to society in a much more structured way than you had possibly thought about it while you were making a living. And we see this, right? So just as context, we did a survey recently where we spoke to 1,000 odd people trying to understand, or essentially try and re-understand what we knew theoretically, but we said, okay, let's go ask. And almost everybody, I say 95% of the people, were looking at the next purpose as giving. And therefore, and giving, not necessarily giving to family or giving to self, which was the earlier stage, but this was giving to anyone that would accept,
Yeah.
which was also different. So, for example, a lot of people wanted to teach, but
Yeah.
did not know who to teach or what to teach.
Yeah.
A lot of people wanted to give, but the only thing they knew how to give was money, right? So, how do you take your time and give? And therefore, in my modern definition of Vanaprastha is giving. Giving meaning or active participation in society, active participation in community. So to me, that's the newer definition of
Mm.
which resonates with what Chip just said, but also resonates with what people, at least in the Indian context, want. And again,
Mm.
Chip, feel free to add if that is similar in other parts of the world, or at least in the US as you see it, or is it different?
Yeah, Eric Erickson, the developmental psychologist, said that there were 8 life stages. Again, in the very Western kind of thinking, he said the seventh life stage, which was really midlife as we know it, was generativity versus stagnation. And generativity is sort of what you're talking about, Neeraj. You're talking
Mm,
about the idea of being in service of future generations, but not because you're just dispensing wisdom, but you're actually still creating. You're still in a creative phase. To be generative means something's coming through you. And and then the last life stage, the eighth life stage, was integrity versus despair. And integrity speaks to this idea of integrating. We're not just growing old, we're growing whole. We are actually able to integrate the various parts of ourselves, the secular and the spiritual, the masculine, the feminine, the introvert, the extrovert, the curious and wise, the gravitas, depth, and the levity, laughter. And when you meet someone who's at that stage in life, that later stages of life, who's integrated themselves, they have done their service work, but now they are preparing themselves for the hereafter, and they've moved out of the compartmentalization stage. And I think it's what's interesting is that I'm a big fan of the forest dweller has always been an interesting life stage in the Hindu philosophy. And as some of you know, I was lucky enough to go to the Mahakumbh Mela, in 2013 in Allahabad. And so I've always been intrigued by the four stages. And then you're giving me some incentive to actually look at the integration of the eight stages of Eric Erickson and the four stages of Hindu culture. But I think that there's a lot of similarities.
Beautiful. Let me throw in another stone into the pond. Are men's journeys different from women's journeys?
Mm.
Quick answer.
Yes.
yes, yes.
You go first,
And
Neeraj.
how?
You go first.
And how?
Yeah, so I'll give the more tactical sort of view, and then Chip, please add the nicer spiritual view that comes with it. See, the tactical view is at least from what we see. So what do we do at WisdomCircle? We are a jobs platform. So we are creating opportunities for people post-retirement to find meaningful work, right? Post-retirement, short duration, part-time. And what we find, although we have more than 80% of men on the platform, and 20% women, we find women getting most jobs. So more than 50% of jobs go to women. Which,
Interesting.
and for us, initially we were like, what's going on here? And what we realize is that the ego still sits a lot with the men. Women have sort of, I'm not saying it doesn't sit with them in some places, but they've kind of they've let it go sooner, Chip, to your point, than the men who, in fact, it becomes even heavier for them, a burden to carry. And it takes them a long time to unburden themselves of it. The women do it much more sooner. So to me, that's the first one. The second thing that we have found as different is men feel they can do anything, and are therefore more confident when they apply for roles. Women, I'll give you an example. So if they meet 5 out of the 10 conditions for a part-time role, men are like, yes, we can do it. Women, even with a 9 on 10, have a doubt. So there is this, I'm not sure if it is perfection, but it is this, and it is how they have been, at least in the context. And this is, by the way, cross-cultural. This is not just an India thing. We've seen this across Europe as well, and the rest of Asia. So these are 2 observations.
Amazing. Very interesting. Chip, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I can't. So, Neeraj, I'm looking forward to spending more time with you to understand the business platform you have and what you're doing and how relevant it might be in the United States. So let's talk about that.
Okay.
So I agree. I actually think there's two I words that define men and women in midlife, and in terms of a fear. For men, it's the fear of irrelevance, and for women, it's the fear of invisibility. And I think that's a lot very cultural, of course. And I think uh, for men, the process of starting to feel irrelevant is very it's a very there's an ego side to that. I agree. Um, there's a sense of judgment. There's a sense of competition. It's very
Yeah,
competitive.
yeah,
Men being competitive, women being cooperative, and I think when men are competitive and they feel like they're losing, their best side doesn't necessarily come out. And in fact, Harvard Business Review has shown that women's level of confidence in their 50s is growing. So it may be that they have humility, but their actual confidence is growing, whereas men's confidence in their 50s in their career is actually plateauing or starting to go down. So men may show the bravado and from a competitive gladiator kind of way, want to look like they know it all. But underneath that is often a feeling of the risk and fear of irrelevance. Now, for women, the invisibility has a lot to do with mate selection and all kinds of things, everything from menopause to women feeling the need to actually keep their looks up, to also women being often in cultures where, from a career perspective, they can feel invisible because if they're in a culture that is predominantly defined and managed by men, often they feel that way. So the invisibility for them is a scary thing, especially romantically. If for women after 50, if you're all of a sudden single because of being widowed or divorced, it's much more traumatic for women than for men. Culturally, but also the numbers are not good because men date younger often, and also men die younger. For those reasons that it's a very challenging time for a lot of women. So I would just say that hormonally, there's this element also for men and women. For women, it's more obvious to them when they're in a transition hormonally uh, through menopause and perimenopause. For men, it's less obvious. And there's this thing called andropause, where men's level of testosterone starts to actually decline by about 1% per year, starting in their late 30s. And they start to get a gut, the visceral fat around the waist, and they have less energy. Uh, and if I'm saying any of this to any of you and you're offended, don't. I'm not speaking to you. I'm just speaking in generally. Um, and so for a lot of men, they're fighting against that, and their fight is sometimes external.
Yeah.
Like there's a brashness to it. For women, the fight is very internal. They don't, and there's a and that's but at last thought is women are much better able to take social support from their friends and family, and therefore in some ways they're more stable emotionally because they have a support network. And men often their friendship muscle is atrophying in their career when they're so busy in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. So when they get to this, their 50s and all of a sudden feel irrelevant, and there's nobody around them other than their wife and maybe their kids, uh, they are a little bit lost.
Wow, this is a really rich little diversion that we went on. Fantastic. I think it'll get lots of interesting comments and questions and reflections for all of us and the audience. Let's go a
And
little
let's say one
deeper.
thing, one thing, Vijay.
Go ahead.
Let's be clear. These are generalizations.
Of course.
So people who are watching or listening to this, I want to make sure that you're hearing that because this is based upon social science. In my case, it's based upon 8,500 graduates of our Modern Elder Academy program from 60 countries, and we have 56 regional chapters. So we have data, but that data may not relate to you personally. So
Yeah.
what I'm saying is based upon averages.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that caveat. One of the things that came up in our survey is the distinction between new priorities and a new identity.
Mm.
And this concept of elderhood, this big transition, is not just a shift in priorities, it's also a shift of identity. So, Neeraj, I want to come to you on this first. What do you think needs to be dismantled internally for this shift to actually happen?
I don't know. I really don't. I think it's such a difficult question. But Chip, why don't you give it a shot? I honestly, I've been reflecting on this question, and I don't know. Because it depends on the individual, right? And therefore, to generalize it will not be doing its service to the importance of the question you just asked. Because the story for everyone is different.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll let Chip go, then I'll maybe tell you my story, and I will then relate it to trying to get an answer to this.
Let me and thank you for bringing up the thing about the personal story, because for me this insight came from my own journey post cancer. That I realized that for me to truly heal, I needed to heal and I needed to deconstruct and reconstruct my identity, not just my priorities or my lifestyle. And so this is something that I've been tussling with. And so that's the context to my question. And Chip would love to hear the answer to the question, what needs to be dismantled internally to shift into that second arc?
So I'll speak personally. So I think all three of us are going to speak a little personally here then. And then I will give a broader context. So for me, when I sold my company at around age 50, I felt wounded and I felt a little bit like a loser. It was the Great Recession and I didn't want to do it anymore. And my company was really was struggling. We had 3,500 employees and we were really struggling during the Great Recession. And I had to get to the place where I was willing to let go of being a VIP, a very important person, to being a PIP, a previously important person, and be open to having my ego right-sized as a result of that. So that was helpful because what it did is there was a humility that came with that and a willingness to let go of an identity. One of the challenging things for a lot of us is the identities we wear with pride. And but then you move out of the era of where the identity fits and you don't know who you are anymore.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that I had to do was I had to be willing to let go of that. And then when I joined Airbnb, realized that I'm not the CEO there. I'm not the founder. I am there to make the founders successful business people and successful leaders. So my definition of success was not seeing my name in the paper. It was to help these leaders become great leaders and help this company grow into a very successful company. So I was in service of, and so my ego had to be right-sized, and that helped. I think one of the things that we've learned at MEA, at the Modern Elder Academy, is that there are 3 stages to any transition. There is the ending of something, the messy middle, and the beginning of something.
Yeah.
And we at MEA call this TQ, transitional intelligence.
Yeah.
Understanding how to navigate transitions in your life, which is something that we're really not taught. You sort of learn it along the way, but there's not like you don't go to college and go to a transitions course that says, here's how you do transitions. But in studying the world religions and the kinds of authors who've written great books, people like Margaret Mead studying indigenous tribes, or Joseph Campbell talking about the hero's journey, we found that there was this commonality of ending, messy, middle, beginning. And for those who want to understand this more on the MEA website, which is meawisdom.com, at the bottom footer, there's something called the Anatomy of a Transition. It's a free resource that helps people to understand how to build their transitional intelligence and what are the coping mechanisms in each of those three stages. Because if you can understand which stage you're in, then you can understand what are the tools you have available to you to actually move beyond that stage.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's a little bit of personal advice based upon my experience, but also practical tools based upon what we teach.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'm a great fan of William Bridges, the book on transitions,
I love that book.
and he describes these three stages and, how we can actually navigate transitions. So beautiful. So coming back to you, Neeraj, anything you would like to share from your personal experience or?
So I'll start by saying that my understanding of what transition phase I was in was when I did the course at MEA Wisdom, right? So, because I was in the messy middle at that time. I was done with my executive search, sort of upbringing, career, and I said, where do I need to go next? I had turned 50. COVID was, we were in the middle of COVID actually when I took that course. And then that's what actually helped me find what I wanted to do and then hence set up WisdomCircle. So that has been my transition. So I've moved from a career consultant, executive search consultant, etc., to now being a founder, helping others navigate this other transition. And for me, that identity shift came from a lot of people, because as an executive search consultant, I would have a lot of people who would reach out to me asking me, saying, Neeraj, we are about to retire. What should we do? And honestly, I did not have an answer. And that bothered me. And this was right about the time when I probably studied everything I could about longevity and aging, and hence the course, and hence all the books on everything that everyone was writing about aging and longevity. And I think the question I started grappling with was, the world is solving for us to live longer. What will we do if we live longer? So that's the problem statement that I am trying to solve for. And then AI happened after I had started, which has made this situation even more difficult for all of us to comprehend in terms of what does it mean for our identity in this world of AI. So my views, I also don't. That's why I said I don't know the answer.
Great.
But I know that we have to get to an answer.
Yeah.
And this is a humanity level stuff.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I notice in my work with coaches, and I position myself as a transitions coach, is that it's a fuzzy, messy area, as Chip has described it. But what I've also realized is that it's fuzzy and messy because it's not cognitive. It's not left-brained. And in fact, one of the key elements in that process is inner work. And so, as one is making the transition from the first arc to the second arc towards elderhood, what kind of inner work, what role does inner work play here?
Let me start that one. So to go back to the start of our conversation, sometimes there's external circumstances that happen that sort of force a transition on you. But for most people, it's an internal, it's in listening. There's a listening going on inside. And we as a culture, and I'm going to speak for the US for a moment, and we are very good at studying the metrics for physical health.
Yeah.
Okay. We know you're physical healthy based upon your blood tests and your heart rate and all these things. So you're physically healthy. Emotional health is a little bit harder. We have words for it. We have words for it. I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling happy, or I'm so there's well, the metrics are a little bit harder, although there are tests that can help you understand your emotional health and a number, but at least we have words for it. When it comes to spiritual health or the inner journey of who you are and how you connect with something much bigger than yourself, we not only don't have words, but we definitely don't have scores. We don't
Yeah.
have numbers. So spiritual health or the inner journey of who you are in a bigger constellation of the world, um, and the belief system that goes with that is something that is it's as long as man has existed, this has been part of our way of being. But the more modern the culture, the more divorced we are from understanding what that feeling is like. And so the inner journey is quite important because there are markers there that may show up emotionally. They also ultimately may show up physically. So let's unpack this for a moment. I've never said it this way, and I am excited to say it this way. When something is wrong inside you, spiritually, you feel somehow a discordant misalignment with something in your life. It's in your intuition, it's in your gut, it's in there's a wisdom around it, there's an essence that says this to you. Sometimes it shows up as the emotional journey, and you're disappointed, or you have regret, or you have anger or betrayal, or whatever it is, and there's something that is showing up emotionally, but it's actually deeper than that.
Yeah.
And then it actually, as has been written in a book called, The Body Keeps Score, then it sometimes shows up physically.
Yeah.
So it shows up physically and in, in stress or in cancer or in all kinds of ways. And like you, Vijay, I've been on my cancer journey. So I think, in midlife, if we don't reacquaint ourselves with that inner journey, which is hard to do because we feel like some people don't feel like they have any capacity or skill at this.
Yeah.
Although frankly, in India, I think much more so than in the United States, there's a lot of skill and capacity and you're surrounded by, sadhus and, well, you're not surrounded by them. If you go to the Mahakumbh Mela, you are surrounded by them. But you have a culture that has people who have been renunciates, and they are in a stage where you can sort of see them. In the US, we have religion, but religion is, smaller and smaller over time. And you have a group of people who are spiritual but not religious, and that's a
Yeah.
growing part of the population. And I think that growth in that part of the population is the result of people realizing that if you strip back the physical health issues to the emotional health issues to then the spiritual health issues, I need to get down to that spiritual health in order to improve my emotions and my physical health.
Yeah.
And so that's how I would look at it. And I think whether it's external circumstances forcing it on you, or it's that disquiet that a person feels in midlife, that something's just not right. And therefore they seek out a coach or a therapist or, meditation practice or whatever it is, or yoga. It helps them to start to realize, oh, I have spent so many decades not listening to my inner voice that it is now time to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Neeraj, what would you like to add from your perspective, from the people you talk to? How important is inner work on this journey towards elderhood?
So Vijay, on the importance, I completely agree with Chip and yourself. But the layer I want to put on this is the cultural layer of, so I just, as a context, right, I spent a long time in the US. In fact, all my graduate school education as well as a lot of work time early in my career was in the US. So I'm able to contrast my learnings from the US with what I now am going through in India, as well as what I observe here. And I've also lived in Africa many years ago. And the role of joint family. So we in India, so not to say that we don't have, uh, you know, um, the challenges that we see in the US, but in India, because of the heritage we come with, we've always had either a suppression of our inner work by people just foo-fooing it and saying, just come on, just get on with your life. The elders we are surrounded with in our joint families, or surrounded, as you said, Chip, with wisdom around us a lot more than I know I was surrounded with when I was in the US, where I was much more alone. So I think who you surround yourself with, and in a way, I look at Modern Elder Academy, Chip, what you're creating is a proxy to a joint family, right? It's a proxy to a support system that allows you to discover your inner self or get on that journey much faster because you can bounce it off others. In the cultural context of Africa, whether it's with the tribes there or in India with our joint family system, that model has existed. And in a way, we have broken away from it. But wherever that model still continues to operate, which we do see in some of the smaller towns in the country, Vijay, I see elders from the smaller cities in joint family systems be a lot more receptive to this move to the next arc, just because they are surrounded by people who've been in that journey and share it. Whereas in the big cities, you have to find it on your own.
Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful. Such lovely nuances. Thank you both for that. I want to challenge, if I may, an underlying assumption. And that assumption is that living longer is automatically a desirable goal. So my question to both of you, and whoever wants to go for it first, please go ahead. Have we confused living longer with living better?
Living deeper to me is a lot more interesting than living longer.
Yeah.
There's the idea of lifespan, and there's also the idea of health span.
Yeah.
And health span speaks to this idea of, can I live longer, but also live healthy and better, such that I have what's called compressed morbidity, which means that the period of time when I'm sick and before I die is a very short period of time. And so I think that there's so many different it's in the 8 years since MEA opened, Modern Elder Academy, longevity has just come onto the forefront. I mean, if I knew 8 years ago, I would have called MEA a longevity institute or something like that, because it's become so almost a fad of how people are so obsessed with biohacking and all of the different ways to actually extend your life. It's mostly men who are focused on that. Women tend to be focused on wellness, and men are focused on longevity. So what I will say is that the don't die movement, the idea that we're going to actually create the medical technology that allows people to live forever, is almost laughable. And I say that with a caution, because I want to be respectful of the people who are spending a lot of money trying to do this, because I think that a lot of good may come out of it for medical breakthroughs. But the idea that we want to live forever robs us of life stages, because then there's not a life stage. What happens at that point, and how does a society deal with it? Now, if we get to a place where that happens, then we'll figure it out, and we'll innovate our lifestyles and our culture. But I think that at the heart of the don't die movement and the idea that people want to live forever is a deep fear of death.
Yeah, exactly.
And the deep fear of death is a core reason why we have ageism. And the reason that we make jokes about people's age as they get older, and in the US, we take people and we put them in retirement communities and we call it age apartheid. You know, we sort of like segregate those old people so they're not visible in the culture. And it's very sad to see that. And so what I would just say is that there's a lot I've just said here, but, a lot of different pieces to that. But I think it's not about living longer. I think it's living longer better.
Yeah.
That's okay. But it's living longer, better, deeper. And
Yeah.
the deeper piece is the part that is often missed. And there's this idea of lifelong learning, which I think is a good thing. But there's a subset of lifelong learning that I've been popularizing, or MEA has been popularizing, called long life learning. Lifelong learning means that at 30 years old or 70 years old, you could be learning photography and you learn it maybe the same way, although a 70-year-old might learn it differently than a 30-year-old. But long life learning is learning how to live a life that's as deep and meaningful as it is long.
Yeah.
And that's a different form of learning. It's a form that is defined by understanding life stages. And someone at 25 or 30 is going to be in have a different point of view around that than someone at 55 or 65. So long life learning to me is what the world needs more of, because what is core to long life learning is understanding not that you're meant to be youthful your whole life, but you're meant to be useful. And this idea that your utility as you get older may be different than it was when you were younger.
Yeah.
Which is, the way we've seen it since the start of man, sort of humankind. The difference, I would say, is that it is not about, again, the power resting with old and giving to the young. It is that symbiotic relationship between old and young. But yeah. So, Neeraj, what do you think?
So I will add again. I think there is a direct correlation between how rich you are and how long you want to live.
True.
Therefore, in India, we don't see as much of the longevity don't die discussion, except in the very rich. So when Brian Johnson was here, he only met with the very rich. And almost the others didn't even care. There is another part of rebirth in spirituality that we believe in, which allows us to live across generations, which again changes the way we think about long life. So again, it's a cultural thing. And so I was, by the way, I live in a retirement community. I moved in with my mother. I'm one of the youngest in the community. In fact, I am the youngest person in this retirement community at 55. And I'm here because I'm trying to learn about everything I thought was going on versus what's going on. I'm on all the WhatsApp groups. I in fact even write sometimes about, without naming the community, I write about what I'm learning. So it's a different kind of inside man, not the Ted Danson type, but the Indian version of it. And I agree with everything Chip has said. And I think the only thing I would add, one more thing that I would add is, I think it comes down to purpose and what is it do you want to live long for?
Yeah.
And that part has not been solved yet. So a lot of people, and we are, so there are, I think in a way we are solving many things at the same time. It's like we're building the plane while flying it, right? So longevity is happening, everything is happening. And then everyone is scrambling saying, okay, holy shit, we still got retirement, we don't have money. Now we're talking about great grandkids. And I'm, anyway confused. I'm confused even more. What the hell should I do? Should I die? Of course, I don't want to die, but what if I die? And then suddenly this whole longevity thing has screwed up everyone's lives, right? Because otherwise we were living in the stages. Now we're adding stages. So I think, right, again, we are in the messy middle of understanding this.
Yeah.
And Chip is ahead in his understanding because he's working, because one, who he is and how he thinks. But a lot of people are still in the messy middle.
Yeah.
Right? They have no idea. In fact, one of the things I think, Vijay, you had asked me earlier, therefore there is something about inviting people to explore this question as opposed to telling people what the right answer is.
Absolutely. Especially because it is so personal, it is so subjective, and it is so culturally, it's cultured, context driven. So the exploration is important. And while we are doing the exploration, it falls upon people like us in this conversation to be able to synthesize some of those principles, to be able to extract some of those principles, because then they can serve as guardrails and they can serve as ropes for other people to climb and go further in their own
Vijay,
explorations.
what I would actually suggest is, in fact, if you just look at the discussion that Chip and I are having, I can feel that we in India are behind the thinking around this, where America is or Chip is, right? Again, I'm not saying there's a right answer or wrong answer. I'm just saying that this is the evolution, right?
Yeah.
And I can see it happening even in India, where now we don't have the joint, family system as much anymore. We don't have, we are getting a lot more, influenced by everything that's happening in the world. And AI is going to make it even much more. Yes, the internet made it, but now it's all shrinking and we're all thinking the same. We're watching the same television shows. We are listening to the same music. But to me, the bigger question is, how do we maintain, and I think, Chip, you said it very well. This is not the first time that any of us are thinking about this problem, right? As long as humanity has existed, someone or the other has thought about this. We've not been able to articulate it. We've not been able to collect it, synthesize it, and share it, which we are now more able to do. Therefore, I actually think there's something more about going back to our roots to understand this question, because this is a question that everyone who has ever lived on this planet has always thought about.
Yeah.
The role of living long, purpose, livelihood, everything that comes with it. So maybe it is not about exploring it forward, it's about exploring it backward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And since we are in the messy middle of trying to figure it out and trying to make sense of it.
I am in the messy middle.
Oh,
Chip is ahead.
We're all there in some part of your life. You're always in the messy middle.
Yes.
Fair point.
Yes.
Fair point.
Yes. So, just to leave the viewer with a live question before we go towards closing, and to remind myself and to remind both of you, what is this second arc really about? The second arc is the phase of life where we stop building the self and start offering who we have become. If we take that as a definition or a description, Neeraj, starting with you first, from all the work that you have done, from the 120,000 people on your platform and the conversations you have and the research you've done and the people you've met, what is the shift, the one shift you would like leaders in today's world to consider as they are moving towards the second arc?
I would actually phrase it not for leaders, but for everyone.
Okay.
And the phrase is, start thinking about it sooner than once you get to the so-called retirement age, or start reflecting upon your participation in society and community much sooner, because it'll just help you merge into that phase without it being an abrupt move.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. And Chip, what would be your advice or your tip for somebody who needs to make that shift?
I think it'd be twofold, actually. Number one is think of friendship as a practice. We practice golf, we practice yoga, we practice singing, we practice all kinds of things in our life because we want to get better at it. And yet, social relationships are the number one variable associated with healthy social relationships are the number one variable associated with living a longer, healthier, happier life in modern cultures. In more primitive cultures, there's lots of other variables around public health that influence longevity. But it's not just that social relationships are good for your longevity; they're just good for your happiness too.
Yeah.
And related to that, I would just say, how do we create a culture that is dedicated to wisdom? We have spent the last few hundred years, and with colleges and universities, focused on accumulating knowledge. And ever since 1959, when management theorist Peter Drucker coined the term knowledge workers have really ruled the world. But all of the world's knowledge is in AI today, and on chat, and on and all these different forms of commoditizing knowledge. And so, how are we now creating a world in which we are helping people of all kinds, but also leaders, to learn wisdom management practices that allow people to metabolize their life experience? I define wisdom as metabolized experience, mindfully shared for the common good. And the world could use more of that.
Mm. Mm. Wow. We've covered a lot of ground today. I'm feeling really stimulated, enriched, a bit confused, but really lots to chew on, lots to mull over. And this is, in any case, was not intended to be a conversation that would come to some kind of logical conclusion or closure. It's an open conversation, and we hope to keep this conversation open. Not only on this particular transition, the transition from the first arc to the second arc of life, but on other transitions as well that many of us face socially, culturally, financially, professionally, technologically, etc. So I guess I just want to quickly thank Chip, you for joining us, sharing your wisdom. Neeraj, for you, for your wisdom, for all your experiences. IG, to Founding Fuel, the team, for giving us this platform and opening the opportunity for us to have this conversation. And finally, to our viewers, I want to leave the viewers with one quotation that I'd like to share. And that quotation is by Mary Oliver. And she says, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" And I guess I want to leave that thought for our viewers. Tell us, what do you want to do with your wild and precious life? And maybe that will spark off a few more such conversations. It will spark off a few more reflections. And who knows, it may spark off a different kind of a revolution. So with that, much gratitude to all of you. Big namaste, Chip, Neeraj, IG. And let me hand over to IG for his closing remarks.
Thank you, Vijay. It's quite hazardous to try and even attempt to distill what we've heard from such a rich and meaningful conversation, but I'm going to try and kind of risk it. And let me share, I think, 3 things that I'm taking away from this conversation. First, I think it's pretty clear that transitions like this are seldom tidy. I mean, life's second arc is uneven. It's very deeply personal, as you shared. from your life experiences. It doesn't arrive on schedule and it doesn't look the same for everyone. Second, I think there's real permission here to slow down, to question old assumptions about success, momentum, usefulness, without feeling the need to immediately replace them with new certainties. And third, that elderhood, I think, approached consciously, is less about stepping back or asserting authority, but more about judgment. Knowing when to guide, when to listen, when to simply stay present. I want to thank Chip Conley for giving us the language and the perspective for this stage of life. Wonderful to have you, Chip. Neeraj Sagar for grounding these ideas in his lived experience. And of course, Vijay Bhat for holding the conversation with such care and openness. Thank you to our listeners for spending this time with us. We'd love to hear your reflections, questions, and responses. And we encourage you to share this conversation with others who might find it meaningful. Thanks for being part of the Founding Fuel community.